I watched every James Bond film, so you don't have to.
Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Who are you?
Bond. James Bond.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
That's right, if you haven't been to my channel, then welcome. Thanks for stopping by. My name's Mr. Alright and I review movies.
I say alright.
I've done a whole series reviewing all 25 of the James Bond series. We call it Bond Rewind over here. And today, I'm summarising every single James Bond actor, every single film, to find out who did it best, and then we can discuss at the end of the video who should do it next. But don't worry, if you think my ratings for one of your favourite films is unfair, there are 6 individual James Bond tropes, which I'll reveal later in the video, and they'll be hinted at throughout, and those categories, they can give each actor an extra point for the trope that they did best. We'll be combining all of the actors' movie scores to get a median average, and then we'll be mixing in those 6 tropes' individual points to create a full ranking list of all of the James Bond actors. So see if you can guess in the comments below which are those 6 tropes without scrolling ahead in the video.
To infinity and beyond!
Alright, so I've reviewed the series in reverse order, and that might sound strange to you, but I grew up watching the Daniel Craig era, and Craig's portrayal of Bond has been one of my favourite cinematic characters of all time. I didn't want to just jump straight back into the 60s era and be disinterested by the outdated effects. I thought I would go back through each era with fresh eyes every time, and some of my ratings might surprise some of you hardcore Bond fans.
I never joke about my work, 007.
So let's start with the Craig era then. Opening with Casino Royale, we're introduced to a brand new Bond in a complete reboot of the franchise. Craig is a gritty, blunt instrument with a natural charm, but he's guarded as well.
Job's done. The bitch is dead.
The film sets up the overarching era perfectly, introducing us to Le Chiffre, a mysterious villain we later find out in the series is tied to the Spectre organisation. In my opinion, I regard this film as a 10 out of 10 because it does so brilliantly at drawing from the 40 plus years of pre-established legacy, whilst also developing the character greatly and giving new viewers something to be drawn in by, from the powerful different opening theme in You Know My Name to the tragedy of Vesper's story, which was clearly inspired by the one-off Lazenby film on Her Majesty's Secret Service. This film is everything a Bond film should be, in my opinion. Maybe that's just nostalgia tinted glasses talking, but it's my gold standard for Bond. What about the rest though? Well, Quantum of Solace is an interesting film. They clearly took the success of developing Bond's character and tried to apply it to every aspect of a James Bond film, but it missed on many occasions. The story adds great depth to the overarching Spectre plot, but with forgettable villains and a genuinely hard to watch Bourne style editing with constant jump cuts, I could only give this film a 7 out of 10. It has the bones of a good Bond film, but just not the execution.
Master Kenobi, you disappoint me.
Skyfall, however, put the franchise back on track. I mean, what a movie. There's not much I can really say that 100 other people haven't before me. It's got the first ever Oscar-winning Bond theme, the return of both Q and Moneypenny, as well as that beautiful Aston Martin DB5. We get a tragic emotional hook with the death of Judi Dench's outstanding M, who kept the prior 2 outings grounded but with high stakes as well. So I have this film at a 9.5 out of 10, though you might be thinking if Casino was a 10 then why isn't this as well? Well, for me it's the rewatchability. Don't get me wrong, Skyfall is a fun watch any day of the week, but Casino Royale just makes more sense. Silver's escape is a little too convenient towards the end of the film. Despite Javier Bardem delivering a chilling villain, it gets less believable each time you watch it.
A face, a uniform, a flag? No. Our world is not more transparent now.
Contrasting though, the desperation of Mads Mikkelsen's Le Chiffre after losing to Bond in a poker game that was meant to wash his criminal client's money. It's ever gripping and always believable. I think that torture scene is one of the most memorable in Bond history.
Money isn't as valuable to our organization as knowing who to trust.
Now, Spectre is where this era, for a lot of people, goes completely off the rails, and I get that. Personally though, I actually give it an 8 out of 10. I still really enjoyed it, especially the opening half.
So why don't you tell me how to find him again?
Oh, come on.
Tell me where he is.
He's everywhere. Everywhere. He's sitting at your desk, he's kissing your lover, he's eating supper with your family.
Now don't get me wrong, the scene of Blofeld returning to MI6 in the middle of what he would consider is enemy territory, it's definitely stupid and very convenient.
I've really put you through it, haven't I? Well, what's brothers for you? They always know which buttons to press.
But I disagree with everyone's hatred of Blofeld's rewrite. I've not read the books, and maybe I should after, especially after reviewing every single film. But you can't seriously tell me that Blofeld was ever a character with consistency in canon. He changes actor 3 times in the Connery era, and again in the standalone Lazenby film, where they seemingly pretend that they've never met before. The character, in my opinion, was just desperately needing a rewrite. And remember, at this point, we have just lost Olivia Mansfield, or Judi Dench's M, the figure who kept Bond emotionally grounded in the previous 3 films. And I think the writers made a good call, using a familial relation from Blofeld to exploit that emotional weakness after the loss of M. I also think that this film ended perfectly, albeit different to any Bond film. Wasn't that kind of the point though with a reboot, to do it differently? Speaking of differently though, we finally got a happy ending for our beloved character, ready to pass the torch on for a reboot, and then Broccoli and co got greedy and decided to do another one, rather than just put the effort into casting a new James Bond and rewriting the franchise again. If you can't tell by now though, I feel that No Time to Die massively stepped down from Daniel Craig's era, what it meant and what it achieved. I'm not going to rattle on for ages because I've talked long enough about this era already, and if I keep going, this video is going to be over an hour long. However, I do give this film a meagre 4 out of 10 for just simply making a film that didn't need to happen, and then sorely disappointing me by disregarding seemingly 95% of the last 4 movies' story, at least their significance. And if you want to hear my breakdown on that, you can check out the full review, which is linked in the description below with the Bond Rewind playlist. I do find this one interesting though, because when I talk to people in real life who like No Time to Die, they typically don't like any of the other Bond films, and that for me speaks for itself. It's a good film, but it's just not a James Bond film. Anyway, as I said, I'm talking way too much and this video is going to be way too long, so let's speed through the rest of the eras. Next up is Pierce Brosnan, who many love for his suave, cold, stoic charm with his excellent physicality. And I have to agree, I think when you look at Pierce Brosnan, you just can't help but see James Bond. For his first film in GoldenEye, I gave it an 8 out of 10 for a solid start and having fantastic practical effects, but I think some of his devoted fans will be more surprised when I say I preferred Tomorrow Never Dies, giving that a 9 out of 10 for continuing the themes established in Goldfinger, opening with such a banging tune and having a dark plot that is, let's be real, realistic in 2025. The World Is Not Enough though is where his era begins to slide, with a pretty boring villain portrayed by Robert Carlyle, who was not favoured by weak writing, and of course Dr. Christmas Jones. That still makes me cringe. I still matched it with GoldenEye as an 8 out of 10 because the practical effects and the look of the film were great, but it just didn't have much to go above that for me. And maybe I was being a bit generous with the ratings. Finally though, we have Die Another Day, which is seemingly a universally hated Bond film, but I still actually enjoyed it, giving it a 7 out of 10. It's extremely over the top and it's very reliant on CGI, so I can see why some really don't like it in comparison to Brosnan's other films, but the worst thing for me was Madonna's awful track. I mean, it was just bad. That being said though, I really enjoyed some of the cars and the actors like Toby Stephens. It was just a weird mixed bag.
You want to continue?
Of course I want to bloody continue!
When it comes to Timothy Dalton though, he is one with a cult following of fans not too dissimilar to the advocates of Brosnan, and although I didn't enjoy The Living Daylights so much, giving it a 5 out of 10, I did much prefer his outing in License to Kill, giving that a 7 out of 10 for its outstanding villain and great set pieces. Maybe I just don't get Dalton enough, but I found his performance to be much less charming than other Bonds, and for me that is a signature characteristic that is vital to the character. Perhaps if he got his lost third outing, we could have seen more development on that, and I guess we'll never know. But if you're this far into the video and you haven't already, why not drop a like, because as a small creator that means the world to me and it really helps drive these videos. Speaking of charm though, we're moving on to the Roger Moore era already, who had the longest stay as James Bond, and maybe he overstayed his welcome. Roger oozes charm throughout all of his films, but for many the physicality and darker aspects of Bond are missing entirely, and they dislike the films for their silliness. With that being said though, the 70s was a harder time for everyone across the world, and I tried to watch these films through the eyes of my mother, who grew up with Roger Moore being her Bond, and she was always telling me how those films were a great form of escapism for people. So let's speed through the ratings. For his first outing in Live and Let Die, I gave it an 8 out of 10. It's a fun film for sure, paired with a timeless opening theme. The Man with the Golden Gun, however, did start to lose me a bit. I love Christopher Lee and he does a great job in the film, but the writing was lackluster and the rest of it just a bit mediocre. I gave it a 6.5 out of 10 as a result. On to The Spy Who Loved Me. It introduced us to the beloved villain Jaws, but I still only gave it a 7.5 out of 10 because the plot is so weak. And actually thinking about it more, I kind of wish I gave it a lower rating at the time. But with Moonraker, I could only justify a 7 out of 10 because of how over the top it is. Although I actually enjoyed Moonraker, I can see why it has so many detractors. Those little laser guns. Pew, 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 pew. It's just bad. But this is where it's going to get controversial for some of you hardcore Moore fans. I really didn't enjoy For Your Eyes Only. It tried desperately to convince people that they were taking Bond more serious again, and then had a parrot solve the plot, with some weak acting mixed in, and then the final scene having a Margaret Thatcher impersonation. It was just in two minds and didn't know what it wanted to be. It's possible I just don't get the humour from the time, but then again, I enjoy some of the humour in his earlier films, and that's why it only gets a 6.5 out of 10. Closing out with his last two though, where they went back into the spectacle, Octopussy drew another 6.5 out of 10, because although it had a better plot than the previous outing and much better acting, I found the recasting of Maud Adams incredibly jarring for continuity, despite her role actually being better than her one in The Man with the Golden Gun. It just didn't make sense to me that Bond would just walk in, see her and be like, huh. Do you know what I mean? Finally though, A View to a Kill. With one of my favourite villains portrayed by the great Christopher Walken, I actually gave this film a 7 out of 10 because I thought the majority of it was better than most of Moore's films. But in this film, it's his age that has so evidently caught up with him, and the romance with the Bond girl is just uncomfortable to watch. A View to a Kill also has that banging theme with Duran Duran. Okay, almost there, and I'll make this one relatively quick, I promise. Liar! I have got to give another shout out though to one of my biggest supporters. Big up to you, Ben. He encouraged me to look at this film in a different light entirely and take myself out of the continuity of the franchise. Watching this as its own standalone interpretation leads me to give it a 9 out of 10. That's right, George Lazenby's On Her Majesty's Secret Service, in my opinion, is one of the best times we've ever seen Blofeld, and Lazenby, he was fantastic throughout this film. Although it's evident in a couple of scenes that he is new to acting, I still found him to be more charming than Timothy Dalton, for example, and he matched the physicality as well. I also found it really frustrating that they seemingly ignored the tragic ending when they dropped him and brought Sean Connery back. I'm glad this film seems to get its flowers in the modern day, because if you've never watched any of the Bond legacy films, I will always push you to watch this as your first, as it does just stand alone deliver such a great story. But now finally, it's on to the big man, and Mr. Sir, Sir Sean Connery, the man so iconically James Bond that author Ian Fleming decided to outwardly make Bond Scottish as a tribute to the actor's real life roots. The franchise kicked off with Dr. No, and I scored it an 8 out of 10 for laying out the formula so perfectly and delivering great thrills throughout. It's not perfect for sure, and it has some dated tropes, but it's 63 years old and it holds up in 2025 far better than some of Roger Moore's films do, for example. And that is a mighty achievement. From Russia with Love comes next, a book beloved by former President JFK that actually kicked off the cinematic franchise. This film delivers a 9 out of 10 for me. The plot has great stakes, the characters are unforgettable, and the train fight is, well, it's a trope that almost every Bond film has done since, and it's because this scene is flawless. Goldfinger comes next though, the film that really took Bond to the heights that we see it at today, and cementing it as a cinematic staple. The first of the Bond movies to open with a lyrical masterpiece, delivered by the gracious Shirley Bassey's ever commanding vocals, and featuring some of the franchise's most iconic villains. It was an easy 9.5 out of 10 for me. I'm just having a little random side thought here, but it is interesting to me how people always talk about Skyfall as the highest grossing film. If you actually crunch the numbers and convert the 1960s money into today's money, GoldenEye actually just about reaches higher than Skyfall's gross. That's pretty fucking incredible for a film that was released in 1964 without the internet. Very impressive. Anyway, I'm waffling again. Thunderball comes next, and this is where the era begins to slip for me. I still enjoyed the film, especially the booming opening track, and I gave it a 7.5 out of 10, but it's clear to see the cracks were forming. With spectacle taking over, where Connery wanted more character development, this is even more present in You Only Live Twice, where at times Connery almost looks bored, and the plot is just ridiculous. Bond's plot armor is pathetically written, and I only gave it a 6 out of 10. But finally, here we are, the last movie in Diamonds Are Forever, and although it opens with the iconic Bassey once again, I could not get behind this movie at all. The plot is far-fetched, the villains are terribly cringe, and it also just pretends Lazenby's film didn't happen, which was such a poor writing decision in my opinion. This film only gets a 5 out of 10 for me. So, drum roll.
What the hell is even that?
What are the scores on the board? Now we've gone through all of the films. Let's look at the scores on the board before we do these 6 extra categories. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to add up the total scores for all of the actors, divide them by the number of films that actor did, giving us a median average score. It's the fairest way I could think of doing this. So for Craig, if we add his 5 films together, we get a total rating of 38.5 out of 50 potential points, divided by 5, and his average Bond score is just 7.7. So yeah, it looks like No Time to Die really does drag this era down. For Brosnan's era, the total score is a clean 32 out of 40 potential points, and divided by 4, we get an average of 8. So he's in the lead right now. Dalton, well, I only gave him 12 points out of 20, which I feel kind of bad for because that leaves us with a meager 6 out of 10. So I am sorry if you're a Dalton diehard, but for me, the era just missed. Although it does make me wonder how much that score would have gone up if the lost third film had got the chance to see the light of day. Roger Moore has a lot of films, so there's a lot of potential points, but also a lot to miss. Roger has the highest total scoring of any of the actors, with 49. But remember, this is out of 70 potential points, and there really was a lot missing from some of his films. So this leaves us with a total score of 7 out of 10, and I think that is totally fair. He's not terrible by any means, but he's also not outstanding, and Brosnan is still in the lead. With Lazenby though, well, he's only got the 1, and if you listen to how I was breaking down the median score, you were thinking, how are you going to do this one? Yes, Lazenby does get a 9 out of 10, so that is his average score, making him our current number 1 Bond. But this is precisely why I decided to make these 6 extra points to be earned, because it gives the other eras a chance to catch up. Some might call this cheating, but who knows? If we got more Lazenby films, who's to say it wouldn't have got as ridiculous as some of the more era? So I think it's only fair that we consider the best songs, best car chases, etc. Because many of these happened outside of Lazenby's film. Connery, however, has a very mixed bag, with some of the highest ratings, but with some of my highest ratings, such as Goldfinger, but also some of my worst. The total score of all my ratings is 45, which sounds great, but it is out of a potential 60. So with 15 points being dropped, the only is total. With 15 points being dropped, the total is only 7.5 out of 10. It's a shame that those last two films didn't hit like the first three. I would have been kind of happy with it to stop at Thunderball, to be honest. So the scores on the board are: number 6 we have Timothy Dalton with a 6 out of 10. Number 5 we've got Roger Moore with a 7 out of 10. Number 4 is Sean Connery with 7.5 out of 10. Daniel Craig is number 3 with 7.7 out of 10. We've got Brosnan up next with an 8 out of 10 at number 2. And finally, in number 1, we've got George Lazenby with 9 out of 10 points. So when you look at it like this, there really isn't that much between them. But how will the extra points affect this standing? We'll return to that shortly, but now it's finally time to stop teasing you and give you those 6 categories. Did you guess them correctly at the start of the video? So without further ado, in no particular order, here are those categories. First off, we've got the best Bond theme. Next up is the best Bond villain, and I could have had best henchman or best villain. I'm considering both here, you'll have to see when I talk about it. There's also the best Bond car chase, the best train fight, the best Q Gadget, and the best Bond girl. So let's get started with the best Bond theme. Now this is a hard one to narrow down realistically. Music is such a subjective topic. While many adore it, I'm personally a bit of a hater for 90s music and turn of the century, early 2000s stuff. That means I typically don't rate Brosnan's era all that high. However, I appreciate that modern audiences from my age group, they probably don't enjoy some of the more iconic older songs like Goldfinger or Live and Let Die. James Bond has always been on the cutting edge of music, and it's always tried to use popular sounds that will resonate with a wide audience from its time period. For that reason, that is why I have always loved You Know My Name by Chris Cornell. It's my time period, and despite Skyfall and Writings on the Wall actually winning 2 Oscars, You Know My Name is always the first song that I go to when I want to listen to a bit of Bond music. Sure, it didn't rise to the same heights as songs like A View to a Kill by Duran Duran or the previous 2 Oscar winners that I just mentioned a second ago. But for me, this song perfectly breaks us into the new era. It keeps in theme with the lyrics and orchestral sounds of prior Bond tracks, whilst also having a radically different tone of voice and a harder rock element, perfectly showcasing the rough and raw agent that James Bond is introduced to us before he earns his license to kill in this film. So if you disagree, I want to know in the comments below, but that is 1 point for Daniel Craig. Oh, it's my 3rd cut of the video. This is what happens when I run out of cigarettes. It's pathetic, but that's the life. So next up in the categories is the best Bond villain. This is another really hard category to narrow down, because I could make popular choices like Jaws or Oddjob, even Mr. Silver, because they are all fan favourites, and for good reason too. However, in discussion with some of my subscribers in the comments about Timothy Dalton's era, I couldn't help but agreeing with you guys that the darker edge of the films gave us the best Bond villain in Franz Sanchez. As a huge lover of Casino Royale, which you already know by now because it's my background visuals, I wanted to pick Le Chiffre because Mads Mikkelsen is outstanding as ever. However, I have to give my flowers to Robert Davi for his fantastically charming villain with a ruthless edge that realistically we still have yet to see in later movies. I mean, come on, the guy feeds Felix Leiter's legs to a bloody shark. And he bursts open the head of one of his allies who does him dirty in a pressure tank. It's fucking mad. Anyway, how much more villainous can you get? So that is 1 additional point for Timothy Dalton. Although it's quite funny that Timothy Dalton didn't even earn himself his point. It's quite ironic, sorry. I'm going to get roasted in my comments by Ben. Ben, I'm sorry. I know you love Dalton. I'm sorry. Right. The best Bond car chase. So when it comes to a car chase in James Bond, what do you want from it? Is it the innovative stunts and vehicle features, or the sound design in post-production with the added tyre squeals and engine revs? Is it the cinematic tension created by the editing, or is it the context of which the car chase happens in? For me, it is a mixing pot of all of those, as bland of an answer that is to give, because I couldn't narrow down just one of the characteristics that makes any car chase stand out more than another. However, when I combine those factors, despite my dismal rating for the film, the Vegas car chase in Diamonds Are Forever is bloody fantastic. Now don't get me wrong, there's no major gadgets on that car, but there is a two-wheeled escape down a pedestrian footpath. We see Bond doing laps around the Vegas police force, causing them to pile up in crashes in a hilarious scene in the parking lot. But it doesn't detract from the tension either, because the cops just kept coming, and Bond still bombed away. I could have chosen the Citroen 2CV choice from Roger Moore's era for many similar reasons, but for me, this one just takes the cake, and that is 1 point for Sean Connery. Jumping into the next train fight, I've got to apologise to George and his supporters here, because the only train scene he got in this movie was deleted from the final cut, and it was allegedly not even a real fight sequence either. But as I mentioned earlier, I just couldn't help but include this as a category because nearly every Bond does it, at least once that is. Roger was a fan of beating up villains and throwing them off of trains, as was Daniel Craig, at least after he got shot off the train the first time. I could have picked any of those scenes because, to be honest, there isn't a bad train fight in this franchise. It's something they somehow always nail on the head. And while it might look like I stole this off the Screen Rant website, I also had the sequence with Red Grant in From Russia with Love as my number one. Not only does it feature our first proper Q Gadget with the tricked out briefcase coming to Bond's aid, but the tension is not lost through the dated action that sometimes affects other sequences. It still maintains the tension of a train fight, much like the scene in Skyfall, and that is now 2 points for Sean Connery. Things are heating up over here. And cooling down outside because it just started pissing it down. Wunderbar. And now on to the best Q Gadget. We mentioned Q Gadgets in the previous section, and these are just a staple for Bond. Not just in the modern day with Smart Blood or the bio-programmed pistol, but with gadgets like the submarine Lotus Esprit or Dalton's sniper rifle dressed up as a box camera. Q Gadgets not only give us a fun way for Bond to flip the script and switch up the momentum of what might be a scene he's got no chance of surviving, but they also give us some of the funniest scenes in James Bond.
Morning, Q. Sorry about the leg. Skiing?
Hunting.
As much as I like Ben Whishaw, I'm sorry, but no one is ever going to top Desmond Llewellyn. He had great on-screen chemistry with every James Bond, and he delivered so many great one-liners over his time. Rest in peace, my friend. But without further ado, gotta say my favourite of the gadgets that Desmond introduced us to has got to be the aforementioned submarine Lotus Esprit. In my full review, I broke down why I hated that car chase sequence, but if you watched it, you'll already know the payoff of diving into the water and escaping with a gadget so cool somehow managed to save that sequence. So that is the first of the points for Roger Moore's era. We've only got one category left and two people who haven't picked up a point yet. So where's it going to go from here? Well, the last of these categories, if you remember, is the Bond girl. Bond girls are a staple of the franchise. They've often been damsels in distress, not adding much to the plot, but in modern times, courageous women with strength of mind in Vesper Lynd or in combat with characters like Jinx. And that makes this a really hard category for me to choose. If I pick one of the older Bond girls, am I just going to be seen as outdated as well? But if I go for one of the Craig girls, am I also just going to be seen as boosting my favourite Bond era? Well, I thought long and hard about this one specifically. A big part of me wanted to choose Tracy Bond for her screen presence and significant ending, but also a part of me wanted to choose Vesper Lynd for being a more complex version of this type of character. However, I ended up settling on, surprisingly, Wei Lin. Being that she is from my favourite of the Brosnan films, I think that makes sense. After thinking about it, I found her encapsulating everything a Bond girl should be. A fierce agent who started off as a rival to James Bond, using her high-level martial arts to outdo many stronger opponents, as well as her smarts to outdo Bond on some occasions, but ultimately getting captured by the villain, Elliot Carver, and requiring Bond to save her. Michelle Yeoh and Brosnan also have the advantage of having excellent on-screen chemistry with each other, despite some of the flawed writing. So that is 1 point for the Brosnan era. Another one who didn't earn his own point. Although I suppose he sort of did, because he worked with Yeoh on screen a lot, so they kind of... I just need to shut up, don't I? Stop waffling.
One eternity later.
So how does this affect our scores? With the additional singular point to Timothy Dalton, he sits at 7, but not tied with Moore for long, as Moore also got 1 point, putting him up to a score of 8. However, Brosnan also gets a point and is now sitting tied with Lazenby at 9 points. And Craig also got 1 additional point, putting him at 8.7. But the ever-charming and the first man to fill the boots as James Bond earned himself 2 extra points with my scoring, bringing his total to a whopping 9.5. So the order now sits at number 5 with Timothy Dalton, 7 out of 10, number 4 being Roger Moore with 8 out of 10, number 3 being Daniel Craig with 8.7 out of 10, number 2 being tied at 9 out of 10 for Brosnan and Lazenby, and of course, number 1 being the man, Sir Sean Connery, with 9.5 out of 10. So there it is. Who did it best, you were wondering? The man who kicked it all off. For many of you, that might never have been in question. But for those of you who've never seen his movies, I can only urge you to check them out, because they are a really fun blast from the past, and they enrich the later films. You can see why so many of his successes pay homage to the original era, with countless references to Connery's Bond films. But that leads us onto who should do it next. The floor is open to you guys on this one. I want to hear every single suggestion you have in the comments and why you think that person should fill the role. I've got a couple myself, but I'm not going to waffle on for ages and keep you here for too long. I want to hear from you, and I want to get back in discussion with you guys. See, for me, after Spectre came out, as you already know, I think the era should have ended. I was extremely excited to see a new Bond back in 2015, and well, I thought who better to fill those boots than another outstanding Scotsman in Richard Madden. After all, Connery cleaned up on our list, and he's the man who inspired Bond's Glencoe origins. However, 10 years on from then, Father Time is unfortunately catching up with this actor, who delivered a brilliant Rob Stark, but also an outstanding performance in Bodyguard, which for me was such a James Bond type role. Like, it was a no-brainer when he did Bodyguard. Why was he not cast? And why was that not kicked into action? So sad. See, the thing is, Richard Madden is now 39 years old, and don't get me wrong, Roger Moore only started at 45 years old, and Dalton and Brosnan were also in their early 40s. But really, we don't want another View to a Kill, or an era cut short. However, we haven't had any real updates on the development of the next Bond film. There are some really exciting rumours that Stephen Knight is going to be penning the script. However, he is also tied up with the Peaky Blinders movie coming out next year, and then 2 more seasons that have just been greenlit.
Am I happy with that? No, I'm not! I want more!
So it could not be until the end of the decade that we see another Bond film, at which point Madden will be in his early 40s, and the last thing anyone wants to see is another View to a Kill or another era cut short like Timothy Dalton. However, that being said, I am also glad the rumours of Tom Holland being pegged for James Bond have been scuppered by his Marvel contract, keeping him busy with 2 major franchises. But who else could it be? I reviewed a movie a couple of weeks ago called Urchin. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It stars 2 brilliant British actors, Frank Delane being the main character of that film, who, although I hold as one of my favourite actors today, the film was also written and directed by Harris Dickinson, who plays Nathan. He's another homeless man associated with Frank Delane's character Mike, and I think Harris would actually make a better fit. Not only is he a young 29 years old, he's tall, and I think he definitely has a look that could pull off James Bond. However, he's also been tied to a 4-movie deal, about the Beatles playing John Lennon. So much like Tom Holland, there are some scheduling issues that could make this impossible. I genuinely cannot muster up a better suggestion than Richard Madden, about 5 years ago it should have been, or Harris Dickinson today. So I want you to drop your suggestions in the comments below, because I hear a lot of people talking about Aaron Taylor Johnson, for example, and I haven't watched enough of his cinematic catalogue, so I couldn't really make a fair comment on that. That's why I want you guys to engage and let me know down below. But that is it. You've made it to the end of this film. I've talked enough and I'm starting to lose my voice. So I'm going to wrap this one up nice and quickly.
Are you sure about that?
Thank you very much for watching all the way to the end. I know this was a longer film. I've got all kinds of content that I want to make. So make sure you drop a like and subscribe and stick around for the next one. It's not always going to be James Bond content, but if you want more James Bond stuff, I can always talk about it. Rumours or I don't know. You guys make some suggestions if you'd like me to. But I've got some great films and TV series that I want to talk about. One that I watched recently was State of Play. It's a film that was inspired by an incredible TV series. I think it would be a really fun one to talk about because it's a political drama that is really quite relevant today. But anyway, as I said, thank you for watching to the end. If you want to check out the full Bond Rewind series and see some of my more detailed breakdowns of the films, if you didn't agree with my ratings especially, then you can do so because I've left the link in the description, along with a link to watch every single one of my other videos in a separate playlist. Thank you to Jagex for always letting us use old school RuneScape music as background music. It's so fun and simple and easy, and it doesn't distract from what I'm talking about. Plus I just love the game, so when I'm editing it's quite cool. But yes, thank you again for watching to the end. Thank you for all your support, and I'm sorry about the delay in this video. We're at 171 subscribers when I've recorded this video, which is crazy because before the Bond Rewind series started, I didn't even have 20. Yeah, mind blowing. You guys are awesome, so stay alright my friends. I will see you next time. Take care.